They saw the hoodie, they saw the skin, and they thought they knew the story. In Southridge, a polished, picture-perfect neighborhood, everything out of place became a silent alarm. A black woman jogging down the sidewalk, hood up, earbuds in, minding her own business, was enough to trigger it. They didn't see Olivia Harris. They didn't see the decades she fought to carve a space for herself. They didn't see the strength stitched into every thread of that worn hoodie. All they saw was a problem. All they needed was a reason. One glance, one wrong assumption, one decision made with the ease of someone who's never had to question their power. And in that moment, under the broad daylight, with neighbors peeking from behind pristine curtains and camera phones recording in silence, a line was crossed. They thought they were putting a black woman in her place. They didn't realize they were about to put themselves on trial. Because Olivia wasn't just another black story they could erase. She was the voice they tried to silence and the storm they never saw coming. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The morning sun hung low over Southridge, painting the quiet suburban streets in gold. It was the kind of place where the grass was trimmed to perfection, where every mailbox gleamed, and where neighbors waved with tight, polite smiles that rarely reached their eyes. Olivia Harris adjusted the hoodie around her face, the soft cotton brushing against her cheeks. She moved with purpose, steady, silent, measured. Every step of her jog was a rhythm she had built over years of practice. Breathe in, breathe out, eyes forward, stay small. It wasn't about fear, it was about understanding. Southridge was beautiful, sure, safe, on the surface, but for people like Olivia, it was also lined with invisible walls built from suspicion, whispers, and stares that lasted just a little too long. Jogging here wasn't just exercise, it was a negotiation. She wore neutral colors. She kept her hoodie up, not to hide, but to minimize the space she occupied in the minds of others. No sudden movements, no eye contact unless absolutely necessary, no reasons for anyone to feel uncomfortable. That's what survival looked like here. The early morning air was crisp. Olivia's sneakers tapped lightly against the sidewalk, weaving past manicured lawns and expensive SUVs gleaming in driveways. No music blasted in her ears, just the low, familiar beat of her own breath. The weight of being unseen was heavy but familiar. She had learned long ago that sometimes being invisible was safer than being noticed. And so, Olivia became the ghost in the crowd, not because she was afraid, but because she understood exactly what it cost to be seen. 3 blocks away, a patrol car crawled down the street like a slow, deliberate shark. Behind the wheel sat Sergeant Thomas Wade, a man molded by 2 decades on the force and a lifetime of silent, unquestioned assumptions. Wade prided himself on knowing when something felt off. Didn't matter that Olivia wasn't doing anything wrong. Didn't matter that she looked like she belonged. In his mind, she didn't. She wasn't smiling politely like the joggers he usually saw. She wasn't waving at passing neighbors. She wasn't doing it right. And that, for Wade, was enough. He slowed the cruiser, one hand resting lazily on the wheel, the other casually tapping his radio. No real call, no real threat, just a feeling. The kind of feeling that had ruined lives before, the kind of feeling that always justified itself later. He watched Olivia for a moment longer, narrowing his eyes. A black woman, hoodie up, alone. Near a Tesla parked in someone's driveway. Maybe she just passed it. Maybe she was casing the house. Maybe she didn't belong here at all. Wade didn't need facts. He had instincts. He jerked the wheel toward the curb and shifted the car into park. The tires crunched against the pavement. Inside the patrol car, for a second, the world stilled. And outside, Olivia, unaware of the danger coiling itself just yards away, kept jogging forward, counting her steps. 27, 28, 29. She didn't notice the patrol car at first, didn't see Wade unbuckle his seatbelt, didn't see the subtle shift in his posture from relaxed to alert. She was too busy surviving. It wasn't until the heavy crunch of his boots on gravel reached her ears that she slowed. Instinct more than anything else. The air around her changed, thickened the way it always did when authority loomed without reason. She pulled one earbud out and turned slightly. Heart rate steady, breathing controlled. She faced him fully, shoulders back, chin level, because Olivia Harris had learned the hard way. You never meet fear with fear. You meet it with presence. Good morning, officer, she said, voice calm. Her words floated into the morning air, soft, non-threatening, deliberate. Wade didn't respond right away. He studied her the way someone studies a broken window or a slashed tire, something to fix. Something wrong. Finally, he spoke. Where you coming from? His tone wasn't conversational. It was clipped, sharp, weighted. Olivia didn't flinch. Home, just finishing my run. Wade's gaze flickered to the Tesla down the block. Then back to her. Where's home? She tilted her head slightly. A small, almost imperceptible gesture of control. A couple blocks over, he shifted, adjusting the duty belt on his waist so that it gleamed under the sun, a silent reminder of power. You got ID on you. The question wasn't really a question. It was an expectation, a demand wrapped in a velvet glove. And just like that, the fragile peace of the morning shattered. For a fraction of a second, Olivia considered lying, saying she had ID tucked into her waistband, pretending to reach for it, making it easy for him to move along. But she had spent too many years swallowing herself for other people's comfort. Not today. No, officer, Olivia said evenly. I don't carry ID while jogging. She watched his face, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something behind his eyes. It wasn't concern. It wasn't confusion. It was irritation. Because she wasn't giving him the answer he wanted. Because she wasn't playing the part he had already written for her in his mind. Wade shifted his weight, boots grinding slightly against the sidewalk. He took a step closer, not enough to touch, but enough that she could feel the message pressing against her skin. I have power. You don't. He glanced up and down the street. A few houses, a few silent witnesses peeking from behind blinds. No one would step in. No one ever did. This is a routine check, Wade said, voice low but firm, just making sure everything's in order. Routine. That word echoed in Olivia's mind, a thin excuse wrapped in years of systemic injustice. Routine meant people like her being stopped while living their lives. Routine meant excuses for bruises and broken bones. Routine meant erasure, covered up by paperwork and polished statements. She swallowed the rising bitterness. I'm not doing anything wrong, she said calmly, her hands still loose and visible at her sides. Wade's eyes hardened. You're refusing to comply, he said. Olivia didn't move, didn't step back, didn't bow her head. I'm asserting my rights. Wade laughed under his breath, a dry, humorless sound that didn't reach his eyes. Well, asserting your rights can look a lot like resisting arrest these days, he said, almost conversationally, almost. The words landed heavy between them. Across the street, a woman watering her garden froze, Jose dangling forgotten from her hand. A man sitting on his porch shifted uncomfortably, pulling out his phone, half curious, half afraid. The air around Olivia thickened, filled with invisible needles. She felt every eye. She knew how quickly things could turn, but she stood still, breath steady, eyes clear. You're escalating this. Not me, Olivia said, voice even. Wade's nostrils flared. He hated that she wasn't scared, hated that she wasn't shrinking, hated that she was making him feel like the villain when, in his mind, he was just doing his job. He took another step closer. Look, he said, the false patience bleeding out of his tone. Either you show ID or I have to assume you're obstructing an investigation." "What investigation?" Olivia asked, tilting her head. The question cut sharper than any insult, because Wade didn't have an answer. There was no report, no call, no crime. Just a hoodie, brown skin, and the unspoken assumption that somehow that was enough. The silence stretched between them taut, electric. Wade's hand twitched toward his belt again. Olivia's heart drummed against her ribs, not from fear, from fury, from exhaustion, from the bone-deep knowledge that at any moment her life could become a hashtag, her name another chant on another street she might never walk again. But still, she didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't beg. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying with it the scent of fresh-cut grass and wet asphalt. Ordinary things, beautiful things, things she might never smell again if this man decided today was the day to make her disappear. Finally, Olivia spoke again. "If you have probable cause, officer, state it. If not, I'd like to continue my run." Her voice didn't shake. She didn't need to scream to be powerful. She didn't need to fight to be unbreakable. She just needed to stand. And standing there, under the weight of centuries of injustice and moments of small, constant cruelty, Olivia Harris chose to stand. Wade's lip curled in frustration. He had a choice: back off, admit he had no grounds, or double down, make this woman pay for challenging him. He chose wrong. He always did. With a sharp motion, he reached out too fast, too rough, grabbing Olivia's wrist. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering against the pavement. The sound echoed down the perfect, polished street, and in that moment, the silent audience gasped. Some lifted their phones higher, some turned away, but the damage had already been done. The hoodie they feared, the black woman they judged. She wasn't the threat. He was. And now, the whole world would see it. The grip around Olivia's wrist tightened, not enough to leave bruises yet, but enough to send a message. You don't get to say no. You don't get to walk away. She didn't struggle, didn't yank her arm back, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, Olivia locked eyes with Sergeant Wade, a calm, steady stare that burned hotter than any scream. A stare that said, "I see you. I see exactly what you're doing." Wade hated it. He hated the way she didn't flinch. He hated the quiet dignity she wrapped around herself like armor. He hated that even in this moment, when he was supposed to have all the power, she still made him feel small. His fingers dug into her wrist harder. "You're under arrest for obstruction," he said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, for the cameras to catch. The words echoed through the still morning air, false and hollow. Across the street, the man with the phone kept recording, his hand trembling slightly. The woman with the garden hose finally turned it off, her eyes wide with disbelief. But no one stepped forward. No one said a word, because Southridge had rules, unspoken ones. Keep your head down, mind your own business, pretend you don't see injustice if it makes you uncomfortable. Wade yanked Olivia's other arm behind her back and slapped the cuffs on rough, fast, unnecessary. The cold metal bit into her skin. Still, Olivia stayed calm. Still, she didn't beg. Still, she refused to let them steal her dignity. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low but firm. Wade smirked, the corners of his mouth twitching with bitter satisfaction. "Lady, the only mistake here is you thinking you're above the law." He shoved her gently toward the patrol car, ignoring the cameras, ignoring the stares. He didn't see them, not really. He was too used to getting away with it, too used to the world protecting men like him from the consequences of their own choices. As Wade opened the cruiser's back door, Olivia caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the tinted glass. A woman in a hoodie, cuffed, framed like a criminal. It would be easy, so easy for someone watching from their window to believe that she had done something wrong. that she deserved this. Because that's what stories like this always said, didn't they? If you were cuffed, you must have deserved it. If you were black and cuffed, the guilt was automatic. The narrative was older than the country itself, but today, Olivia Harris refused to let that story be written without a fight. Wade pushed her down into the cruiser's back seat. The door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. The air was thick and stale. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath, gathering herself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because what Wade didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the world had changed. The phones recording from across the street weren't going to be tucked away quietly. The people whispering behind curtains weren't going to forget what they saw. And Olivia Harris wasn't just another black woman in a hoodie. She was someone they never should have underestimated. As Wade climbed back into the driver's seat, he radioed in, casually reporting a routine arrest, like it was nothing, like it was just another day. Olivia opened her eyes and stared out the window as the cruiser rolled down the sun-drenched street. The same manicured lawns, the same pristine sidewalks, the same neighbors who had watched and stayed silent. But now, cracks had started to form beneath that polished surface. Small cracks. Hairline fractures in the story Southridge told itself about what kind of place it really was. And through those cracks, the truth would slip out. The cruiser turned onto the main road. The town center coming into view, a quaint little strip of cafes and boutiques. People bustled about, sipping lattes, carrying shopping bags, laughing under the mid-morning sun. They didn't notice the police car at first, didn't notice the woman in the back seat, or if they did, they didn't look too closely, because looking too closely might make them question things they didn't want to question. And comfort. Comfort was easier than justice. In the back seat, Olivia shifted slightly, the cuffs biting into her wrists. The pain was sharp, real, but it was nothing compared to the fire building in her chest. This wasn't just about her. This was about every person who had been stopped, questioned, humiliated for daring to exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was about every hoodie judge before the heart beneath it was even seen. This was about every story that ended before it even had a chance to begin. Olivia Harris knew who she was. And by the time this was over, Southridge was going to know it too. Southridge loved its illusions. It loved the tidy lawns, the brick mailboxes, the PTA meetings filled with whispered judgments disguised as polite conversation. It loved the idea that injustice was something that happened somewhere else, somewhere louder, dirtier, less curated. Here, everything ugly was neatly tucked away, or so they thought. Until a woman in a hoodie refused to stay invisible, the fallout began quietly. A few grainy videos, uploaded by nervous hands, started circulating on local social media pages, clips only a few seconds long, but enough to show a black woman jogging, enough to show a police officer grabbing her without clear cause, enough to show the cuffs glinting in the morning sun. At first, the comments followed a familiar script. She must have been doing something wrong. There's always more to the story. Just comply and you won't have a problem. But then, the second videos appeared, from different angles, from different neighbors. Angles that made it impossible to deny Olivia hadn't been aggressive, she hadn't resisted, she hadn't threatened anyone. She had stood still, calm, composed, and Wade had cuffed her anyway. The narrative Southridge loved, the neat little story where authority was always right and anyone challenging it was wrong, started to crack. Hairline fractures in a perfect facade, and from those fractures, the truth began to seep out. Inside the Southridge Police Department, the tension was thick enough to taste. Wade sat stiffly at his desk, staring blankly at the incident report he had just filed. It was routine, boilerplate, sanitized. He hadn't lied, not exactly. He just hadn't included the parts that would make him look bad. No mention of the absence of probable cause, No mention of the unnecessary force, just vague phrases about suspicious behavior and non-compliance. It would have been enough in the old days. Before everyone had a camera in their pocket, before the truth could go viral in less than an hour, Chief Alan Branson paced his office, rubbing his temples. He had seen the videos. He had heard the buzz online, and he knew exactly what was coming. Phone calls, emails, demands for statements, community leaders asking uncomfortable questions. Southridge wasn't ready for that kind of attention. They prided themselves on quiet excellence, on discretion, on not being like those other cities. And now, thanks to one officer's arrogance, their whole house of cards was trembling. Meanwhile, Olivia Harris sat silently in a cramped holding cell. The walls were painted a sickly shade of gray-green. The bench beneath her was cold and unforgiving. She didn't move, didn't pace, didn't rattle the bars like the movies always showed. She sat still, back straight, eyes forward, waiting, because she knew sooner or later someone was going to realize the magnitude of the mistake they had made, and when they did, it wouldn't just be Wade who had to answer for it. It would be the whole system that allowed someone like him to believe he could get away with it. The clock ticked. An hour passed. Then another. Finally, the door creaked open. A young officer, no older than 23, stepped inside. He looked nervous, eyes darting everywhere but at her. Ma'am, you're free to go." Olivia raised an eyebrow. No apology, no explanation, just dismissal, as if everything that had happened was a minor inconvenience. She stood slowly, every movement deliberate. The officer flinched slightly, as if expecting confrontation. But Olivia said nothing. Words were useless when the system itself was deaf. She walked past him, past the buzzing fluorescent lights, past the silent stares of the front desk staff. She didn't slam the door as she left. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The reckoning had already begun. Outside, the sun was brighter, harsher. The world seemed sharper, more brittle. People passing by on the street cast her quick, furtive glances, some curious, some sympathetic, some guilty. Olivia pulled her hoodie up again, shielding herself from their stares. Not hiding, never hiding, but reminding herself and them that her existence didn't require their permission. Every step she took back toward her car felt heavier, but it was also laced with a strange, powerful kind of freedom, because now they had seen, they couldn't unsee, and whether they admitted it or not, they knew. The first strike didn't come from a fist. It came from whispers. It came from Facebook groups filled with tight-lipped neighbors typing words they would never dare say aloud. From next-door app posts filled with phrases like concerned citizen and maintaining the safety of our community. It came from the passive-aggressive glances Olivia caught at the grocery store. The polite half-smiles that quickly disappeared when she looked back. Southridge was moving, not fast, not loudly, but like a tide pulling away from her. She saw it in the way Mrs. Keller, who used to wave every morning, suddenly pretended not to notice her jogging past, in the way the barista at the cafe forgot her order for the first time in years, in the way parents pulled their children a little closer when she walked by the playground. No one said it out loud. They didn't need to. The hoodie was louder than any accusation. At first, Olivia tried to pretend it didn't matter. She had survived worse. She had outlasted stares, whispers, exclusion 1,000 times before. But there was something different about this. This wasn't just individual ignorance. It was collective. It was orchestrated. It was a subtle, silent punishment for daring to break the rules of invisibility. Southridge didn't care about right or wrong. It cared about comfort. And Olivia had made them uncomfortable, unforgivable. The videos kept spreading. Beyond the local neighborhood groups, beyond Southridge, they were reposted, retweeted, picked apart frame by frame. Commentators on small YouTube channels and podcasts started picking up the story. A woman arrested for jogging. A black woman. No weapon. No aggression. No crime, just cuffed. The narrative that Southridge had clung to, that Wade had good instincts, that Olivia must have acted suspicious, started collapsing, brick by brick. But with collapse came something else. Fear. Fear that outsiders would judge them. Fear that investors might look elsewhere. Fear that Southridge might lose its precious, pristine reputation. And when communities like Southridge feel fear, they don't reform, they retaliate. The first retaliation was small. A letter in Olivia's mailbox. No return address. Typed words. No signature. You don't belong here. Maybe it's time you left. She read it once, then again, then slowly folded it and placed it back inside the envelope. Not because she was afraid, because she needed to remember. The second strike was harder. An anonymous call to the H.O., a board, claiming Olivia's yard was out of compliance, that her grass was half an inch too tall, her trash cans visible from the street. Petty, vindictive nonsense. But the notices came anyway, stacked on her front door like accusations. Each one a reminder that she wasn't welcome. Each one a message. We can make your life harder. We can make you wish you had stayed invisible. And still, Olivia didn't flinch. She mowed her lawn. She tucked away her trash bins. She smiled when the H.O., a representative, a man who couldn't meet her eyes, handed her yet another warning. She didn't fight the small battles because she was saving her strength for the real one, the one they didn't even realize was coming. Late one night, Olivia sat alone at her kitchen table. Hoodie pulled over her head. The only light coming from the glow of her laptop screen. The screen showed an email. Subject line, request for interview, local news. She stared at it for a long moment. She knew what this was. A chance to tell her side. A chance to shatter the careful lies Southridge was weaving around her. But it was also a risk. Speaking out meant opening herself to even more scrutiny, more retaliation, more hate. They had already made her a target just for existing. What would they do if she dared to speak? Olivia closed her eyes. She thought of every child who would grow up here, every black boy walking to school with his hood up, every black girl jogging with headphones in, thinking the world was safe. She thought of herself, at 17, standing in front of a guidance counselor who told her not to aim too high. At 23, sitting through meetings where her ideas were praised when repeated by someone else. At 30, smiling politely while neighbors locked their car doors when she passed. She thought of the millions of small cuts that didn't bleed but scarred, and she made her decision. Olivia clicked reply. She began to type, each word a slow, deliberate, unshakable. I would be honored to share my story. She hit send. And with that small, simple act, Olivia Harris declared that she would no longer be their ghost. She would be the storm they never saw coming. The interview was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, not in a grand studio with polished floors and blinding lights, not with a headline-hungry anchor or a sensationalistic agenda. Just a local journalist named Carmen Reyes, a woman Olivia had met once before at a town hall meeting, someone who actually listened when others talked, someone who asked questions not to trap, but to understand. Olivia liked that. She didn't want a platform for rage. She wanted a platform for truth. Carmen arrived at Olivia's house with a small camera crew, just one cameraman, a sound tech, and a heart full of questions. No grand setup, no makeup artists, no scripts, just a worn hoodie, a kitchen table, and a woman finally ready to be seen. They started simply. Carmen placed a small microphone on Olivia's hoodie and asked, gently, tell me what happened. Olivia took a breath, then another. Then she spoke, slowly at first, choosing her words carefully, but as the minutes passed, her voice grew stronger, steadier. She talked about the run, about the stop, about the feeling of being studied like an object, judged without evidence. condemned without trial. She talked about the cuffs, the cruiser, the stares that hurt worse than the steel on her wrists. She talked about the silence of Southridge, how the same neighbors who waved at her yesterday had become ghosts today. And then she talked about the bigger picture, not just her story, but the story. The story of how every hoodie carried assumptions, every glance carried judgment, every silence carried complicity. Carmen listened, really listened. There were no interruptions, no sensational headlines typed in real time, just the steady recording of truth. When the interview ended, Carmen reached out her hand, squeezing Olivia's gently. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. Olivia only nodded. She didn't trust easily anymore, but something about this moment felt right, felt necessary. The piece aired that night, a 5-minute segment on the local news. Simple, unadorned, powerful, no dramatic music, no flashing graphics, just Olivia, sitting at her kitchen table, telling the story in her own words. And when the broadcast ended, something shifted. The first text came from a former coworker. "I saw you. I'm sorry for what you're going through. If you need anything, I'm here." Then an email from a retired teacher. "Thank you for speaking up. We see you." Then a phone call from the Southridge Community Center, offering to host a listening session, a real one, not just a performative exercise. The tide was turning, not fast, not enough to erase the pain or undo the past, but enough to show that not everyone was content to stay silent. Enough to remind Olivia that power didn't always come with a badge or a title. Sometimes, power came from simply refusing to disappear. Of course, not all the reactions were kind. Anonymous messages still slipped into her inbox, warnings to stay in her lane, thinly veiled threats. Some neighbors still crossed the street to avoid her, still yanked their children away when she jogged by. But Olivia had stopped caring about their comfort. She wasn't living for their approval. She was living for every kid who needed to see that wearing a hoodie wasn't a crime, that existing while black wasn't a justification for suspicion. That dignity wasn't something you earned, it was something you carried, even when the world tried to strip it away, especially then. Late one evening, Olivia stood on her porch, hoodie up against the cool breeze. She watched the streetlights flicker on one by one, bathing Southridge in a soft, fragile glow. She thought about how much had changed and how much hadn't, how the first strike hadn't broken her. It had revealed her. It had forced the world to really look at what they had tried so hard to ignore. Across the street, a young black boy rode his bike past her house, hood up, shoelaces untied, head high. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look like he was trying to disappear. He looked free, for the first time in a long time. Olivia smiled. Maybe the strikes would keep coming. Maybe the whispers would never stop. But they were building something stronger now, story by story, step by step. And this time, they weren't backing down. Southridge was never loud about its cruelty. It was quiet, refined, surgical. Public humiliation here wasn't about mobs or shouted insults. It was about slow, cutting isolation, 1,000 tiny slashes you only noticed when you started to bleed. And Olivia Harris was bleeding. It began the morning after her interview aired. She pulled into the parking lot of her favorite cafe, the one where she had spent years building quiet, casual relationships with the baristas, the regulars, the old woman who always knitted by the window. It should have been just another day. But as she walked through the front door, hoodie up, head high, the entire room seemed to tilt. Conversations faltered. Chairs scraped awkwardly against the floor. Eyes darted away. Too quickly. Too guilty. The barista behind the counter, Jason, who used to greet her with a smile and a "good morning," Liv suddenly found something fascinating on the espresso machine. When she stepped up to order, he barely looked at her. "Name," he asked flatly, like he had never seen her before. She blinked, caught off guard, but she refused to show it. Olivia, he scribbled something quickly on the cup, called out the total without making eye contact. She paid in cash. She didn't trust smiles anymore. When her drink came out, her name wasn't Olivia. It was Problem, written in sloppy black marker across the cup sleeve. For a moment, Olivia stood frozen, the cup burning against her palm. A few customers glanced at her, then away. No one laughed. No one said a word. Because here, the cruelty wasn't about open mockery. It was about plausible deniability, about pretending that maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe she was the problem. She set the cup down slowly on the counter, then, without a word, turned and walked out. The door swung shut behind her, rattling slightly in its frame. It didn't end there. At the grocery store, the cashier forgot to scan her loyalty card. At the librarian misplaced her reserve book, the one she had been waiting weeks for. At the gym, her locker was mysteriously emptied. Her things dumped unceremoniously in the lost and found. Small things, petty things, but relentless. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Southridge wasn't trying to break her body. It was trying to break her spirit. And maybe it would have worked. Once. Maybe a younger Olivia, the one still desperate to belong, to be accepted, would have crumbled. But the woman walking these streets now, she had learned. Acceptance was a weapon they used against you, a leash they offered only if you stayed small, stayed silent, stayed grateful for crumbs. Olivia Harris wasn't grateful anymore. She was done begging to exist. Still, the weight of it wore on her. She wasn't made of stone. She felt every averted gaze like a slap. She heard every whispered troublemaker like a gunshot. There were nights she sat in the dark of her living room, hoodie pulled tight around her face, hands shaking from the sheer exhaustion of being constantly, endlessly watched, not with admiration, not with empathy, with suspicion, with contempt, with fear. And she knew deep down that was the most dangerous part. Not the open threats, but the quiet ones, the ones that slipped into the spaces between conversations, the ones that hardened into policy, into silence, into violence. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the perfect rooftops of Southridge, Olivia decided to walk to the community park. She needed air, movement, space. The park was half empty, the usual buzz of joggers and picnicking families strangely absent. She moved toward the swings, her favorite spot when she saw them. A group of teenagers, mostly white, loud, restless. One of them, a boy in a varsity jacket, noticed her first. He nudged his friends, whispering something that made them all turn. And then the taunt started, low at first, almost playful. "Hey, it's Hoodie Girl. Better watch out. She might sue us if we breathe wrong." Laughter, sharp and mean, peeled across the empty park. Olivia kept walking, jaw tight, hands clenched inside her sleeves. She wasn't going to give them a show. She wasn't going to give them her power. But as she passed, one of the boys, the one in the jacket, called out louder, crueler. "Hey, Problem, lose your handcuffs." The other boys howled with laughter. And that's when Olivia stopped. She didn't turn around. She didn't shout back. She just stood there, still as a statue, letting the words hang heavy in the air, slowly, deliberately. She pulled her hoodie tighter around her head, and then without looking at them, without giving them an inch of her dignity, she kept walking. Because the greatest humiliation wasn't in what they said, it was in the fact that their cruelty couldn't reach her anymore. They could taunt her. They could mock her. They could try to turn her into a caricature, a cautionary tale. But Olivia Harris had already chosen her story, and they were nothing but noise in the background. The days blurred together. Every morning, Olivia woke up wondering how Southridge would punish her next. Would it be a cold shoulder from a neighbor she once helped carry groceries for a backhanded comment at the community board meeting? A notice stuck to her door about some new violation of neighborhood standards. She learned to brace herself for it. The daily erosion of humanity dressed up as concern and procedure. But what she didn't expect was how much it hurt. Not because she needed their approval, not anymore, but because she had once believed this place could be different. She had once believed people would choose kindness over comfort. She had once believed that if she just worked hard enough, smiled wide enough, stayed quiet long enough, to they would see her. Not her hoodie, not her skin, her, but now she knew better. And knowing better came with its own kind of grief. The next blow landed on a Saturday afternoon. The Southridge Fall Festival, an annual event, bustling with food trucks, local vendors, smiling families taking selfies under golden leaves. Olivia almost didn't go. Every part of her wanted to stay home, curled up on the couch, away from the stares and the whispers, but she remembered what she had promised herself. She wouldn't disappear. She wouldn't let them erase her. Not again. She wore her favorite hoodie, deep gray, soft from years of wear, pulled it up tight, and walked straight into the heart of Southridge. At first, the crowd parted around her like water around a stone. People smiled too brightly, laughed too loudly, a bubble of forced normalcy that somehow made her feel even more alien. She walked past booths selling overpriced candles, hand-stitched tote bags, artisanal cupcakes. She heard them, the murmurs, the way conversations dipped to a hush when she passed, the way mothers gently steered their children out of her path. The way groups that once called her neighbor now looked at her like an inconvenience, a scandal, a stain. She made her way to the food court area. The smells of roasted corn and kettle corn thick in the air. She stood in line for a lemonade, heart hammering against her ribs, willing herself to stay still, to stay present, to stay unbreakable. When it was finally her turn, the teenage vendor, a boy who couldn't have been more than 16, looked her up and down, then smirked, then, slowly, he pulled out a Sharpie and wrote a word on the plastic cup before filling it. He handed it to her without meeting her eyes. Olivia took the cup, looked down, and read the word written in bold, black letters, lawsuit. A few people nearby chuckled, soft, cruel. Olivia felt the heat rush up her spine, not embarrassment, rage, cold and sharp. But she didn't throw the cup. She didn't storm off. She simply set it down on the nearest trash can, a silent, deliberate rejection of their attempt to humiliate her, and walked away. Not defeated, not diminished, stronger, because every time they tried to shame her into silence, they only revealed themselves. Still, it wore on her. That night, alone in her kitchen, she sat staring at the crumpled festival map in her hand. Her hoodie still clung to her like a second skin, heavy with the weight of the day. She thought about the boy at the lemonade stand. What had he been taught to believe, that people like her were threats, liabilities, that dignity was conditional on silence? She thought about all the other black kids growing up in places like Southridge, breathing in that quiet poison day after day, and she realized something. Public humiliation wasn't about her. Not really. It was about sending a message to anyone who looked like her. Stay small, stay quiet, or we will make an example out of you. But Olivia Harris had already made her choice, and she wasn't an example. She was a warning. The next morning, she put on her hoodie, tied the strings tight, laced her sneakers, and she ran down the same streets that tried to unmake her, past the same houses where curtains twitched nervously, past the parks, the cafes, the polished lies, step after step, heartbeat after heartbeat. She ran because she could. She ran because they wanted her gone. She ran because every mile carved a new space where she belonged, whether they accepted it or not. By the time the sun rose fully over Southridge, Olivia Harris was miles ahead of their hate, and she wasn't stopping. Not today, not ever. The last public humiliation wasn't shouted across a park. It wasn't scribbled on a coffee cup. It came dressed in official letterhead. A week after the fall festival, Olivia opened her mailbox to find an envelope stamped with the Southridge Homeowners Association seal. She carried it inside, her fingers already tightening with instinctive dread. Sitting at her kitchen table, she slid a knife along the envelope's edge, pulling out the folded papers inside. It was formal, cold, deceptively polite, notification of special review. The letter read, "Due to recent events and concerns raised by community members, your residency within Southridge is being reviewed for compliance with our standards." There was no mention of what recent events meant, no mention of what concerns had been raised, just bureaucratic smoke, and a very clear message hidden between the lines: "You are not welcome here." Olivia sat back in her chair, the letter trembling slightly in her hands, not from fear, from fury, because she knew exactly what this was. It wasn't about compliance. It wasn't about property values. It wasn't even about her hoodie. It was about punishment, about warning anyone who dared to stand up, anyone who dared to say, "I belong here too," that they would be made to suffer for it, quietly, legally, efficiently. Southridge didn't burn crosses. It filed paperwork. She could have packed up right then, sold her house, moved to another neighborhood, started fresh somewhere. She wasn't treated like a threat wrapped in cotton, but Olivia Harris had survived far worse than paperwork. She didn't run when they cuffed her. She didn't run when they mocked her. And she wasn't running now. She reached for her laptop and began to write. The first email went to Carmen Reyes, the journalist who had interviewed her, then to the Southridge Civil Rights Coalition, then to a few lawyers whose names she remembered from stories like hers, not begging for help, not asking for permission, simply stating the facts: "I'm being targeted. I'm not leaving, and I'm not staying silent." The response came faster than she expected. Within 48 hours, the story had made the rounds online. Black homeowner faces retaliation after exposing police misconduct. Southridge H.O., accused of targeting resident for speaking out. Social media exploded. Emails flooded the H.O. inbox. Calls jammed their office lines. Southridge, the town that had prided itself on keeping its name out of headlines, was now the center of a storm it couldn't control, and at the eye of that storm stood Olivia Harris, unmoving, unbowed. The next a meeting was packed. Residents who had never attended before now filled the folding chairs. Murmuring anxiously, local reporters leaned against the back wall, cameras slung over their shoulders. And there, seated calmly in the front row, was Olivia, hoodie on, back straight. She didn't need a microphone. Her presence spoke louder than any speech. The H.O., a president, a gray-haired man named Mr. Holloway, cleared his throat nervously as he read the opening statement. They used all the right words: concern, community standards, misunderstandings. But the damage was done. Everyone in that room knew the truth, and this time, they couldn't pretend not to see it. When they opened the floor for public comment, a few brave souls stood up. Some spoke in defense of the standards, trying desperately to salvage Southridge's image. But others, more than Olivia expected, spoke for her: a young mother in yoga pants, an elderly man who remembered the civil rights marches, a college student home for break, voice shaking with anger. They stood up, one by one, and said what needed to be said, that this wasn't about grass height or parking violations or community values. It was about control, fear, racism dressed up in neighborhood rules. When Olivia's turn came, she stood without hesitation. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply said, "You can try to push me out. You can try to shame me, silence me, erase me, but I am still here. I am not afraid, and I am not going anywhere." The room fell silent. No cameras clicked, no phones buzzed, just silence. The kind that fills spaces too long, left empty by truth. Later that night, as Olivia walked home under the same flickering streetlights, she felt the weight of the day settle onto her shoulders. But this time, it didn't crush her. It steadied her. Because the worst had happened. They had dragged her name through the mud. They had humiliated her in public. And she was still standing, still breathing, still walking. Hoodie up, heart wide open. They could threaten her home. They could smear her name. But they could never take away the simple, stubborn fact of her existence. Olivia Harris was not a ghost. She was a fire, and no amount of humiliation could extinguish her. Every system has a point of no return, an invisible line that, once crossed, changes everything. In Southridge, that line wasn't crossed with fists or torches. It was crossed with whispers, keys, spray paint, and cold, practiced cruelty. The first threat was almost laughable. An anonymous email, move while you can. Don't push your luck. Olivia Harris had read it, shrugged, and deleted it. Cowards never scared her. Not when she had survived far worse: the silent meetings, the slammed doors, the tight smiles that turned to knives the moment her back was turned. But the threats didn't stop. They multiplied. You made your bed. Now lie in it. Accidents happen. Would be a shame if you stayed. We know where you jog. Each one was a whisper wrapped in digital ink. No names, no faces, but the message was clear. Leave, or we will make you leave. Olivia refused. She locked her doors tighter, checked her windows twice, jogged with her phone clipped to her sleeve. Camera always one tap away, but she would not run. She would not bow. Not now. Not ever. The first real blow came on a Wednesday evening, after a long day at work. Olivia pulled into her driveway just as the sun kissed the rooftops with gold. She almost didn't notice it at first, the slight discoloration on the garage door. But when she stepped closer, her stomach twisted. There, scrawled in thick, dripping red spray paint, "Get out." The letters were jagged, frantic, ugly. They screamed even louder because Southridge itself remained silent. No one rushed over to help. No one offered to scrub it clean. No one even called. Olivia stood there for a long moment, keys digging into her palm. She could feel them watching. Neighbors peeking through curtains, children pulled back from windows, phones hovering in hands not to call for help, but maybe to record, just in case something happened, just in case she dared to fight back, because then they could finally say, "See, we told you she was trouble." The police arrived an hour later, not because anyone else called, because Olivia filed the report herself. A young officer knocked on her door, awkward and fidgety. He didn't even pretend to care. He scribbled notes on a clipboard, never quite meeting her eyes. When she asked if they would investigate, he shrugged. Hard to prove anything without witnesses. He said, Olivia almost laughed. Witnesses? Southridge was full of them, but they had all chosen the same side. Silence. That night, Olivia slept with the porch lights on and a baseball bat next to her bed. Not because she was weak, because she was tired. Tired of surviving instead of living. Tired of armor that never came off. Tired of a world that only noticed black pain when it bled loudly enough to stain their carpets. But even in exhaustion, her resolve hardened. They wanted her afraid. She would not give them that. The next day, another escalation. She found a dead rat on her doorstep. Small, bloody, its body arranged neatly like a morbid offering. This time, she didn't call the police. What was the point? Instead, Olivia grabbed a plastic bag, cleaned up the mess herself, and went about her day. But every step she took that morning was heavier. Every glance she caught out of the corner of her eye was sharper. Southridge wasn't trying to scare her into leaving anymore. They were trying to break her spirit. That weekend, a neighbor she barely knew, a wiry man with a Labrador, stopped her on the sidewalk. "Maybe it's time you thought about moving on," he said, voice low and confidential, like he was giving her friendly advice instead of issuing a warning. Olivia just smiled, a slow, razor-sharp smile. "I'll think about it," she said, and kept walking, because the truth was she wasn't going anywhere. If they wanted her gone, they would have to look her in the eye and admit why. And Southridge didn't have that kind of courage. The final straw, the one that made Olivia realize the game had changed, wasn't the threats. It was the letter that arrived in a crisp, official envelope, Southridge Homeowners Association. The words were sterile, bureaucratic. "Due to community concerns regarding recent events and activities, we must review your standing as a resident in good standing." She didn't need to read past the first paragraph. It wasn't about community concerns. It wasn't about recent activities. It was about her refusal to shrink, to disappear. They couldn't arrest her. They couldn't silence her. So now they would try to evict her quietly, legally, politely, like all things in Southridge. Olivia folded the letter carefully, placed it on her counter, and then, hoodie zipped up to her chin, she walked out onto her porch. The late afternoon sun painted the street in long shadows. Across the road, a few neighbors watched her from behind their windows, waiting, wondering, hoping she would break. Olivia just stood there, silent, steady, daring them to look at her, really look at her, and see the truth they had been running from. She wasn't leaving. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Southridge had crossed the line, and now Olivia Harris was drawing her own. When a community decides you are the enemy, it doesn't always come for you with pitchforks and fire. Sometimes it comes with paperwork, with silence, with doors that don't open anymore. But Olivia Harris had already seen Southridge's true face, and she wasn't afraid of it anymore. The notice from the Meiji O.A. wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war, buried in legal language. They accused her of violating unwritten codes of decorum and bringing undue attention to the community. In other words, for existing loudly, for refusing to be invisible, for refusing to be quiet about injustice. They scheduled a mandatory hearing 2 weeks from the date of the letter, a meeting where they would review her compliance, a meeting where they hoped to shame her out of her home without ever saying the real words, black, unwanted. Olivia spent those 2 weeks preparing, not with fear, with purpose. She consulted with attorneys from the local civil rights coalition. She gathered copies of every letter, every photo, every threat. She documented every petty retaliation, from the defaced garage door to the dead rat to the slashed tires. She built her case piece by piece because Olivia knew if Southridge wanted a fight, she would give them one they would never forget. Meanwhile, the attacks continued. Her trash cans were knocked over almost nightly. Her mailbox was smashed open twice. And once, she found shards of glass sprinkled across her driveway like a cruel welcome mat. Each act was small enough to excuse, small enough to deny, but together, they formed a mosaic of hatred that no reasonable person could ignore. Some nights, Olivia sat awake at her kitchen table, hoodie wrapped tight around her, staring into the dark. She wasn't naive. She knew that any of these small acts could turn bigger, could turn deadly. But fear no longer ruled her. Rage did. A deep, righteous rage. The kind born from centuries of being told you didn't belong. The kind that could fuel you when nothing else could. The night before the hearing, Olivia went for a run, not because she needed the exercise, because she needed the reminder of her body, of her power, of the ground under her feet that no one could take from her. She ran the long loop through Southridge, past the park where she had been mocked, past the cafe that had humiliated her, past the pristine lawns and polished cars. She ran until her lungs burned and her muscles ached, until she could feel herself existing fully in every breath, every heartbeat, every step. She ran because they wanted her to disappear, and she had no intention of granting them that wish. The morning of the hearing, Southridge was washed in golden light. Everything looked normal, perfect, even. The hedges trimmed, the sidewalks swept, the flags fluttering lazily in the breeze. But underneath that surface, the community was fraying. The media had picked up her story again. Local stations, national podcasts, even a few viral TikToks dissecting Southridge's quiet racism. Reporters had started camping outside the HEO, a building. Residents who once ignored Olivia now glared at her, as if blaming her for their discomfort. But Olivia didn't flinch. She pulled her hoodie tight, and she walked through their discomfort like it was air. Inside the meeting hall, folding chairs lined the room in neat rows. The HO, a board members, 7 men and women, all white, all wearing tight, forced smiles, sat behind a long table at the front. Mr. Holloway, the president, cleared his throat as Olivia entered. He looked tired, defensive, good. Olivia thought, he should be. She took a seat in the front row. Her attorneys flanked her, silent but solid, behind her. The audience murmured, a mixture of residents, journalists, and activists. The walls of Southridge's perfect facade were cracking, and everyone could hear the creaking. Mr. Holloway began the meeting with the usual pleasantries, talk of community values, of preserving the spirit of Southridge, thinly veiled code for erasing anything or anyone that didn't fit their image. When it was Olivia's turn to speak, she stood slowly, no notes, no trembling hands, just truth. She spoke clearly about the threats, about the vandalism, about the silence of neighbors who once called her friend. She spoke about what it meant to live every day with the knowledge that your existence itself was considered a violation. And then she said the words that rippled through the room like a lightning strike. You can try to vote me out. You can file your papers, hold your hearings, hide behind your rules, but you will never erase me because I was here before your fear, and I will be here long after it. There was no applause, no cheers, just silence, heavy, uncomfortable, real. For the first time, Southridge had to sit in the truth of what it had become, and for the first time, Olivia Harris wasn't asking for acceptance. She was demanding respect. The hearing dragged on for hours, motion after motion, technical terms thrown around like Shield's covenant compliance, community aesthetics, resident harmony. It was all theater. Everyone in that room knew the truth. The board wasn't judging Olivia's grass height or mailbox color. They were judging her existence, her defiance, her refusal to bow. Outside the meeting hall, the story spread. The local news station ran a live update, cutting away from weather reports to capture the tense atmosphere. Social media flooded with hashtags Stand with Olivia, Silent No More Southridge, Hoodie Pride. The neighborhood that once prided itself on anonymity was now a national symbol, and not the kind they wanted. And every camera pointed at that HO. A building made it harder for them to hide behind their rules. Inside, Mr. Holloway grew redder by the minute. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, papers shuffling, water cups rattling. They weren't used to being watched, scrutinized. They weren't used to being the ones held accountable. When the final motions were read, it was clear they didn't have the votes to expel her, not without igniting a lawsuit they couldn't win, not with the whole world watching. Southridge's dirty little secret was now public knowledge, and the one thing they valued more than exclusion was reputation. Mr. Holloway cleared his throat, voice tight. The board has decided to issue a formal warning regarding Miss Harris's behavior, but No further action will be taken at this time. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. A formal warning, a desperate attempt to save face. Olivia sat still, didn't smile, didn't cheer. Victory wasn't about noise. Victory was about survival. The meeting adjourned quickly after that. Board members scattered like roaches under a flip light. Reporters flooded toward Olivia. Microphones outstretched, cameras flashing. But she didn't rush to speak. She took a breath, steady, measured. And then she said, "Clearly, I didn't win today because the system is just. I won because they couldn't afford to lose face. There's a difference. And the fight isn't over." Then she walked away, not because she was running, because she had nothing left to prove. As Olivia stepped out into the bright afternoon light, a small crowd waited, some holding signs Olivia, "We stand with you," some simply clapping quietly. Among them, faces she didn't recognize, people from outside Southridge, people who had seen her story and decided it mattered. For the first time in weeks, Olivia felt it. Not victory, something better. Community, real community, built not on fear, not on conformity, but on courage, on truth, on resistance. That night, Olivia sat on her porch, hoodie loose around her shoulders, sipping a cup of tea. Across the street, porch lights flickered on. A few neighbors sat on their front steps, silent, watching, but not with the same venom as before. Some were curious, some were embarrassed, and a few, just a few, seemed to carry the weight of quiet regret in their posture. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was a crack, a beginning. Her phone buzzed. Another message, this one from Carmen Reyes. "Congrats, Olivia. People are listening." Olivia smiled, not because it was over, because it had finally begun. The next morning, she laced up her sneakers and went for a run. Same streets, same sidewalks, same hoodie pulled over her head. The difference wasn't the path, it was the posture. She ran not like someone surviving, not like someone hiding, but like someone claiming space. Every step pounded a rhythm into the cracked sidewalks of Southridge. "I am here. I belong here. I am not leaving." When she passed the cafe, she saw Jason, the barista who once wrote "problem" on her cup. He stood behind the counter, frozen for a moment when their eyes met. Olivia didn't stop, didn't glare. She just kept running, because forgiveness wasn't owed, and vengeance wasn't necessary. Her existence was enough. Her endurance was enough. Her story, the one they tried so hard to silence, was now stitched into the streets they thought they owned. And with every mile, every breath, every heartbeat, Olivia Harris was writing a new story, one they couldn't erase, one they couldn't control, one they couldn't stop. The heavy slam of the cruiser door echoed against the polished sidewalks of Southridge. Inside the car, Olivia sat still, her hands cuffed behind her back, her hoodie clinging to her damp skin. She stared straight ahead, through the tinted glass, past the manicured lawns and trimmed hedges, past the faces pressed silently behind curtains. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She waited. Across the street, the black SUV pulled to a slow, deliberate stop. The engine idled for a second, low and throaty, before two men stepped out. Sharp suits, cold eyes, movements efficient, precise, practiced. They weren't here to argue. They were here to end it. Sergeant Wade was still fumbling with his radio when the first man approached. He moved like he belonged here, like the ground itself tilted to clear his path. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply lifted a leather badge holder, flipping it open to reveal a golden shield that caught the sun like a weapon. "Internal Affairs, City Police Oversight Division." Wade blinked, the words sinking slowly through the fog of adrenaline and ego. The second man came up behind him, silent, watchful, surveying the scene like a hunter clocking every weakness in the room. He held a thick folder tucked under one arm, evidence, paper trail, receipts. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," the first man said, voice smooth but carrying the weight of orders that didn't need repeating. Wade hesitated, his hand still resting on the cruiser's frame, his body caught between fight and flight, but the voice left no room for choices. Now, Wade took a half step back, his chest heaving slightly under the strain of confused anger. He tried to open his mouth, to object, to explain, but before a single word left his lips, Olivia Harris emerged from the back seat, uncuffed, upright, unbreakable. One of the agents had moved so fast, Wade didn't even see the keys come out, didn't even realize how easily his authority had been peeled from his hands like cheap paint in the sun. Olivia stood there, breathing steady, her hoodie rumpled but her posture sharp, regal. She turned to face Wade fully, no hate in her eyes. No pleading, only the kind of calm that made cowards flinch. "Sergeant Wade," Olivia said, her voice clean and cutting. "You have just unlawfully detained the executive director of the city's Office of Civil Accountability." Silence slammed down over the scene. The grasshoppers stopped chirping. The air itself seemed to seize. Wade's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. From somewhere behind him, a phone buzzed, a quiet, brutal sound. The first drops of the storm that was about to swallow him whole. The second agent stepped forward now, flipping open the thick folder. Inside photographs, printed emails, official memos, a timeline already constructed, an investigation already begun. All they had needed was this final piece, and Wade, in his arrogance, had handed it to them like a gift wrapped in violence. "Sir," the agent said, his tone almost bored, "you are hereby relieved of duty pending full investigation into misconduct, racial profiling, and use of excessive force. You'll need to surrender your badge and weapon immediately." Wade staggered, blinking under the brutal midday sun. He looked around, searching for help, for allies, for any shred of the untouchable power he thought he owned. But the neighbors who had peeked through their windows, they stayed hidden. The cameras that once captured Olivia's shame now turned eagerly to catch Wade's fall. He was alone, exactly the way men like him always thought they could leave others cold. Isolated, without defense. He fumbled at his belt, unclipping his badge with trembling fingers. The clatter it made when it hit the SUV hood was louder than any gunshot. His weapon came next, placed down with exaggerated care, like that would save him from the weight of what was coming. The first agent nodded once. "Kurt, step aside. You're done here." And just like that, Southridge's quiet enforcer was nothing more than another man standing empty-handed on a street that didn't belong to him anymore. Olivia didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to, because real power, the kind they had tried to deny her, wasn't about noise. It was about standing tall when everything around you tried to drag you low. It was about refusing to bow, refusing to break. And in that moment, under the watching eyes of a neighborhood built on exclusion and fear, Olivia Harris reminded him that real power wears no uniform. It walks quietly, it moves with truth, and when it wakes, there's no shutting it back to sleep. The sun beat down harder now, as if even the sky refused to offer Sergeant Wade a shadow to hide in. He stood there, hollow and trembling, the badge and gun he once wore like armor stripped from his body, left to gleam uselessly on the hood of the SUV. People began to drift out of their houses, first a crack of a door, then a cautious step onto a porch. Phones raised again, but this time, not to catch a black woman in imagined wrongdoing. This time, they were documenting the fall of one of their own. Wade looked up, squinting into the sunlight, searching the faces for someone, anyone who might come to his defense. but the faces stared back at him coldly, dispassionately. No sympathy, no loyalty, only the hunger of a crowd sensing blood in the water. This was Southridge, after all, and Southridge protected itself even if that meant discarding one of its enforcers when he became a liability. The internal affairs agents didn't linger. They moved with the same clinical efficiency they had brought with them, securing Wade's badge and weapon, logging them into evidence, radioing back to headquarters. There was no ceremony, no drawn-out humiliation, just the swift, brutal efficiency of a system eating its own. Olivia stood a few feet away, silent under the weight of her hoodie, the fabric still damp from the struggle, but her back was straight. Her chin was high. Her presence was undeniable. She didn't have to say anything to make her victory known. It was stitched into the way she stood unwavering, unafraid, the way her breath rose and fell in a steady, unbroken rhythm. When the agents finished their work, the lead one, a tall man with dark sunglasses and a jaw set like concrete, turned to her. "Miss Harris, thank you for your patience. We deeply regret what you endured today. We will be following up with you personally to ensure a full investigation and corrective action." Olivia simply nodded. No grand speeches, no emotional breakdowns. She accepted their words like you might accept rain necessary, but not a blessing, not after everything. One of the neighbors, a woman Olivia recognized from the PTA meetings, stepped hesitantly onto the sidewalk, clutching a phone in one hand and a gardening glove in the other. Her mouth opened, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain away her earlier silence. But Olivia didn't give her the chance. With a small, deliberate movement, she pulled her hoodie higher over her head, and she walked past Wade, who sagged against the cruiser, defeated and shrinking by the second, past the gawkers and the whisperers, past the judgment and the fear. Each step she took was a declaration louder than any shouted protest. I am still here. I am not broken. I am not afraid. The agents moved to load Wade into the back of another patrol car, one brought in specifically for the arrest of officers under investigation. It was a grim process heavy with the irony that Wade himself had once escorted so many others to their shame from that same seat. And now, stripped of power, stripped of uniform, he tasted the humiliation he had so often served. As Olivia reached the end of the block, a group of teenagers huddled near a parked car parted instinctively, their laughter dying in their throats. They had seen the news spreading on their screens in real time. They knew. One of them, a black boy no older than 14, caught her eye. His hoodie was pulled up tight over his head, much like hers. For a moment, time froze. A silent recognition passed between them, a shared history, a shared pain. And now, maybe, a shared hope. Olivia gave him a small nod, barely perceptible, but the boy straightened his shoulders and nodded back, as if receiving a blessing he didn't know he needed. Behind them, the street buzzed with the beginning of fallout, reporters arriving in vans, setting up cameras, neighbors whispering, pretending they hadn't just spent weeks trying to pretend Olivia didn't belong. The official statement from the police department already being drafted, full of careful words about isolated incidents and reviewing department policies. It didn't matter, because Olivia had already torn the mask off, and no amount of spin could put it back on. As she walked, the pain in her wrist where the cuffs had cut deep began to throb, a reminder that the body always remembers what the mind tries to survive, but she embraced it. Each pulse of ache was a reminder she had faced them, and she had endured. Ahead of her, the golden sun lit the cracked sidewalks, the chipped curbs, the ordinary imperfections of Southridge that no amount of curated lawns could ever fully hide. And for the first time, Olivia didn't feel like a ghost moving through hostile territory. She felt real, solid, unshakable. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their apologies. She didn't even need their understanding. All she needed was her own 2 feet, her breath, her will, because the shadow they tried to silence had woken, and it wasn't going back to sleep. The breeze picked up as Olivia rounded the corner toward her house, lifting the hem of her hoodie like a soft whisper against her skin. She tugged it tighter around her, not because she needed protection, but because the fabric now felt different, not just a shield, but a banner, a flag planted firmly in ground that others had tried to rip away from her. Behind her, the noise of the street grew louder, the whine of news vans pulling up, the low rumble of neighbors' voices, buzzing like hornets stirred from a nest, the soft but unmistakable clatter of a reputation collapsing, piece by piece. And yet, Olivia walked as if none of it touched her, because it didn't. They had thrown everything they had at her: suspicion, humiliation, violence, and she was still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. Her house came into view at the end of the block, a modest, neatly kept place with a small front porch and flower beds she had planted herself one spring when she still believed Southridge could be home. It was still home because she said it was, not because they permitted it. As she crossed her driveway, a car door slammed a few houses down. Olivia turned her head slightly and saw Mrs. Winston, her elderly neighbor, standing by her mailbox, the same Mrs. Winston who had once handed her a basket of cookies when she first moved in, the same Mrs. Winston who hadn't looked her in the eye in weeks. Now, Mrs. Winston stood frozen, as if deciding whether to pretend she didn't see Olivia or acknowledge the truth hanging between them. After a moment, she gave a small, hesitant wave, an apology too small. Too late. Olivia didn't wave back. She simply turned away, her focus on the door ahead. Inside her home, the air was cool and still. The faint smell of lavender from the candle she had left burning that morning lingered in the space. She closed the door behind her with a quiet click, leaned back against it for a moment, and let the silence wrap around her like a balm. Safe, for now. Her phone buzzed again on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a flood of notifications, text messages, emails, missed calls, reporters wanting interviews, community groups offering support, strangers from across the country sending messages of solidarity. It was overwhelming and beautiful and heavy. She silenced the phone without reading the messages. There would be time for that later. Right now, she needed a moment to breathe, a moment to feel the weight of what she had survived. She peeled off her hoodie, the fabric damp and clinging to her arms, and dropped it gently over the back of a chair. Her wrists ached where the metal had dug in. Small, angry bruises were already beginning to bloom purple and dark against her brown skin. Olivia traced the marks lightly with her fingers, not with sadness, not with anger, with reverence, because these bruises were proof, not of defeat, but of endurance, proof that they had tried to erase her and failed. She stood in the middle of her kitchen, hands resting on the counter, head bowed, not in prayer, not in surrender. In gathering her breath, her spirit, her strength, because survival wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. A sharp knock at the door startled her, quick, firm, not the uncertain tapping of a neighbor, not the clumsy pounding of a threat. She moved cautiously, peeking through the peephole. On her porch stood Carmen Reyes, the journalist who had first told her story to the world. In Carmen's hands, a microphone and a folder. Behind her, a cameraman adjusting a lens. Waiting, Olivia hesitated for a breath, then opened the door. Carmen smiled, a small, respectful smile that didn't assume anything. "May we come in?" she asked quietly. "We'd like to hear what you have to say now that the world's finally listening." Olivia stepped aside, holding the door open, because this moment wasn't about retelling her pain. It wasn't about reliving the injustice. It was about claiming the narrative, shaping it, owning it. She led Carmen into the living room, where sunlight slanted through the blinds and dust motes floated like tiny, defiant sparks. As the cameraman set up, Carmen leaned in and said, "You don't have to say anything you're not ready to say." Olivia nodded, but she was ready. She sat down on the couch, pulled the hoodie back over her head, and waited for the camera's red light to blink on. When it did, she looked straight into the lens, steady. Sure, she didn't fidget. She didn't glance away, because this wasn't just her moment. It was a moment for every Black woman who had ever been stopped, questioned, doubted, every Black girl who had been taught to shrink herself into palatable pieces, every soul who had worn a hoodie not as a weapon, but as armor. And when Olivia spoke, her voice was clear and unwavering. "I am not what you fear. I am not what you shame. I am not your cautionary tale. I am Olivia Harris, and I am here to stay." The camera blinked, capturing every word, every breath, every beat of her unstoppable heart. Outside, Southridge turned under the weight of a story it could no longer control, and inside, Olivia Harris rewrote the ending herself. The interview aired that same evening. No fancy production, no dramatic music swelling behind her words, just Olivia, a hoodie, a voice that refused to crack, even under the weight of everything Southridge had tried to bury her with. And once it was out there, once her story seeped into living rooms and phones and news feeds, something shifted, something snapped. The fall began quietly at first, a single pebble loosed from a mountainside, then another, and another, until the whole facade came crashing down. Sergeant Thomas Wade was the first casualty. His face, once hidden behind the safe anonymity of a badge, now plastered across news stations. His name attached to headlines no amount of PR spin could clean up. Southridge officer suspended after alleged racial profiling incident. Internal Affairs investigates unlawful detainment of Black executive. Public trust erodes in Southridge Police Department. The town that prided itself on perfection now found its name tangled with words like discrimination, injustice, scandal, and the damage wasn't just cosmetic. Businesses that once bragged about their Southridge addresses began quietly removing them from their websites. A few real estate listings disappeared overnight. No one wanted to buy property where lawsuits loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Home values dipped. School boards held emergency meetings. The mayor issued a brittle statement about reaffirming Southridge's commitment to inclusivity. But even as he spoke, the cameras caught the tight clench of his jaw, the nervous twitch of his fingers. They weren't sorry about what happened. They were sorry they had been caught. And Wade tried to fight it. At first, he hired an expensive attorney, one of those silver-haired men who spoke in smooth, practiced outrage about how their client had been unfairly targeted for simply doing his job. He filed appeals. He gave carefully edited interviews on minor networks, painting himself as the real victim. But the world had already seen the footage. The world had already heard Olivia's voice. And no amount of framing could change what people had seen with their own eyes. A Black woman, calm and dignified, a white officer, aggressive without cause, a system cracking under its own weight. Sponsors pulled funding from Southridge's police charity events, the city council meetings. Once sleepy and predictable, now drew protesters carrying signs that said things like, "Justice for Olivia, accountability now, we are watching." Wade's name became a punchline on late-night shows, a hashtag trending for all the wrong reasons. And eventually, even the police union, once fiercely protective of its own, quietly distanced itself. No press conference, no formal declaration, just a slow, deliberate abandonment. By the third week, Wade's appeals dried up. His lawyers stopped returning calls. His former colleagues stopped answering texts. He was suspended indefinitely, pension pending review, career in ruins. He had become radioactive. And all the loyalty he had expected from the department, from the town, from the community he believed he had served, vanished like smoke because Southridge didn't love him. They loved what he represented: order, control, quiet. And once he threatened that, he was disposable. Wade wasn't the only one who fell. The Southridge Homeowners Association, emboldened at first to push Olivia out quietly, now found themselves drowning in public outrage. Activists dug into their records, uncovering a long, ugly history of selective enforcement. Turns out Olivia wasn't the first Black resident to face a compliance review, just the first who refused to disappear quietly. Lawsuits loomed, investigations launched, federal civil rights groups began sniffing around, asking the kind of questions Southridge had never wanted to answer. At town hall meetings, angry residents, the ones who once looked through Olivia like she didn't exist, now turned on the very people who had encouraged the campaign against her. "You brought this shame on us," one woman shouted across a crowded gymnasium, finger stabbing the air at the H. "Oh, a president. You made Southridge a joke, not because they believed in Olivia, but because they feared the reflection now staring back at them." And so the blame game began. Wade blamed the department. The department blamed the HOA. The HO blamed the sensational media. Neighbors blamed each other. Everyone scrambling, clawing, desperate to escape the wreckage of their own making. Meanwhile, Olivia stayed silent. No interviews, no press statements. She jogged every morning past the same cracked sidewalks and twitching curtains, hoodie up, head high, because the truth didn't need her to shout anymore. The truth was doing just fine on its own. And Southridge polished, pristine. Southridge was learning that some falls don't come with warning signs. Some storms don't announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through the soft, steady footsteps of someone who refuses to bow. And when they come, they leave nothing standing. The news cycle didn't let go. In the days that followed, every major outlet picked up the story. National papers ran op-eds about systemic bias, cloaked in suburban respectability. Morning talk shows hosted panels asking why it always took a camera, a viral video, for people to believe the victims. And Olivia Harris, the Black woman in the hoodie Southridge had tried to erase, became a symbol bigger than any one neighborhood could contain. She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't wanted it, but it had arrived anyway. Because people were tired. Tired of pretending the injustice was accidental. Tired of pretending that polite racism wasn't still racism. And Olivia, with her quiet defiance, her steady refusal to be broken, had cracked something open. A movement began to coalesce. Slow but certain, silent marches were organized, small at first, then growing, filling the streets of nearby towns, spilling into Southridge itself. Hundreds of people, hoodies up, heads high, walking the same sidewalks where Olivia had once jogged alone. They carried signs: "Every hoodie has a story," "Dignity can't be cuffed," "Strength in silence." Olivia watched from her porch the first time they came, not as a spectacle, not as a parade, but as a testament, proof that even in the heart of silence, even in the coldest soil, something could still bloom. Southridge didn't know how to handle it. Police presence increased, but they stayed back, wary now of making the same mistakes twice. The town's council members, desperate to control the narrative, scheduled an emergency community healing forum. Flyers went up overnight. Emails flooded inboxes. "We invite all residents to participate in open dialogue to restore trust and unity." But it was too late for that. The masks had already been ripped away, the damage already done. Unity wasn't built on top of silence. It had to start with truth. And truth was the one thing Southridge still refused to face. At the forum, stage inside the gleaming auditorium of the Southridge Civic Center, the tension was a living thing. Neatly dressed officials sat stiffly behind folding tables. Smiling with all the sincerity of mannequins, Olivia arrived not as a guest, but as a warning. She wore her hoodie, simple and worn, as she took a seat in the second row. Her presence alone a challenge no one dared to name out loud. The mayor stood first, delivering a carefully worded speech about understanding and healing, words polished smooth by consultants, words that meant nothing. After him, a woman from the H.O. read a bland statement about commitment to shared values. Another performance. The microphone was open to the floor, and for a long moment, no one moved. The silence hung heavy, daring someone to shatter it. And then a teenager stood, a black boy in a blue hoodie too large for his frame. His voice cracked as he spoke, but he didn't sit down. "I don't feel safe here." He said it simply. No anger, no dramatics, just truth. "I see what you did to her. I know you could do it to me." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone coughed, but no one interrupted. And when he finished, Olivia caught his eye. She gave him a small nod. The same nod she had given the boy by the sidewalk weeks before. Courage recognizes courage, one by one. Others spoke. A young mother, a retired teacher, an immigrant father. Stories poured out not just about Olivia's arrest, but about the quiet rot that had festered under Southridge's polished surface for years. The missed promotions, the suspicious glances, the unspoken rules about who belonged and who didn't. The officials listened, stiff and sweating, trapped by the very narrative they had tried so hard to control. By the end of the night, it was clear Southridge couldn't bury this. They could hold 1,000 forums, draft 1,000 hollow resolutions. It wouldn't change what they had become in the eyes of the world. And more importantly, it wouldn't change what they had become in the eyes of their own people. Outside the Civic Center, reporters swarmed for quotes, their cameras hungry for sound bites. But Olivia didn't stop. She didn't need to explain anything. She had already said everything she needed to say just by standing, just by staying. The cracks in Southridge's foundation widened. Families began putting houses up for sale. Businesses reconsidered their leases. The local economy, so carefully curated, started to tremble because image was everything here, and the image was shattered. The fall wasn't a moment. It wasn't a news headline. It was a slow collapse, the kind that happens when truth becomes too loud to ignore. Southridge had built itself on a lie, and lies, no matter how pretty, eventually rot. Olivia watched it happen, not with glee, not with vengeance, but with the steady, unwavering certainty of someone who had survived the worst they could throw at her and still stood, stronger than ever. By the third week after the incident, Southridge was no longer the same place it had once pretended to be. The whispers hadn't stopped, but they had changed. They weren't about Olivia anymore. They were about survival. How do we fix this? How do we clean this up? How do we make them forget? But Olivia hadn't fought to make them forget. She fought to make them remember, to remember what silence costs, to remember what dignity demands, and whether Southridge liked it or not. The remembering had already begun. The police department issued new directives, mandatory sensitivity training, revisions to their community policing policies. It all sounded impressive on paper, a desperate scramble to shield themselves from lawsuits and scrutiny. But Olivia knew better. Policy couldn't change hearts hardened by years of quiet cruelty. Paperwork couldn't rebuild trust already burned to ash. The real change wouldn't come from their hands. It would come from the cracks they had tried so hard to seal, from the students who now walked into Southridge High with their hoodies up in solidarity, from the small businesses that put signs in their windows. "We see you. We hear you. You belong." From the conversations whispered behind closed doors, in living rooms once silent, now buzzing with uncomfortable truths. It would come from the younger generation who saw Olivia not as a troublemaker, But as proof that standing tall was possible, and even if Southridge never admitted it, Olivia knew she had already won, not by force, not by rage, by refusing to bow, by refusing to disappear. The fall of Thomas Wade was just the first tremor. The H.O. A board once so confident in their power now faced a class action lawsuit. Several former residents, emboldened by Olivia's stand, came forward with their own stories, stories of petty citations, stories of intimidation dressed up as neighborhood standards, stories that all shared one thing in common: their skin color. The Department of Housing and Urban Development launched an investigation. Federal agents arrived in their government-issued sedans, briefcases in hand, knocking on the same pristine doors that had once been so eager to pretend nothing was wrong. Panic gripped Southridge. Property values plummeted further. A proposed luxury development pulled out, citing community concerns. The fall wasn't a collapse. It was a slow, humiliating erosion, not dramatic enough for headlines anymore, but devastating enough to rot from the inside. Olivia watched it all with the steady patience of someone who understood cycles. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She lived. Each morning she tied her sneakers, pulled her hoodie up, and jogged the same streets that had once tried to erase her. Each step was a declaration: you tried to push me out. You failed. One chilly Sunday morning, as she jogged past the park where teenagers had once taunted her, she saw something new. A mural, painted on the side of the old community center. Bold, unapologetic. It was a figure in a hoodie, head high, walking forward against a storm. Beneath it, 3 words: "Still I rise." Olivia stopped, breath catching in her throat. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't orchestrated it. It had simply appeared, a gift left by anonymous hands who understood. She stood there for a long time, the morning sun casting long shadows across the pavement. People passed her, some slowing down, some quickening their steps, some nodding slightly in respect. The town hadn't changed completely. The roots of its fear ran deep, but the seeds had been planted. And seeds, once planted, have a way of growing even through concrete. That evening, Olivia sat on her porch, a cup of tea warming her hands. Across the street, the old woman who once ignored her now waved hesitantly. This time, Olivia lifted her hand in return, not because she needed their acceptance, not because she forgave their silence, but because she refused to carry their hatred any longer. Victory, she realized, wasn't about making them change. Victory was about refusing to let them change her. The fall of Southridge wasn't just their reckoning, it was her liberation, not from the town, not from the prejudice, but from the need to make herself smaller for their comfort. She was done shrinking. She was done surviving. She was living, fully, boldly, without apology. And somewhere deep inside the polished, cracking heart of Southridge, they knew it. They feared it, because for the first time, they couldn't silence the hoodie. They couldn't shame the story. And they sure as hell couldn't stop Olivia Harris from walking her path. Hoodie up, head high, into whatever future she chose. The first real shift wasn't a headline. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't even a mural. It was a feeling, subtle, persistent, unstoppable. It started in the way Olivia jogged through Southridge, no longer weaving between invisible walls, no longer shrinking her steps to fit their comfort. She ran straight, unapologetically, as if the sidewalks had always been hers, because they were, and some people noticed them. The boy on the bike, the one who had once nodded shyly at her across the street, now rode beside her sometimes, matching her pace for a block or two before peeling off with a grin. The woman at the grocery store, the same woman who once clutched her purse tighter, now handed Olivia a flyer for a diversity committee being formed at the town library. Tiny cracks, tiny shifts, Not a revolution, but the beginning of one. And Olivia didn't need grand gestures. She didn't need public apologies written in shaky hands. She didn't need Southridge to love her. All she ever needed was space to exist without being told she was wrong for existing. And she had carved that space with every steady step, every silent refusal to bend. The lesson wasn't written in ink. It was written in presence, in the quiet power of standing still when the world tells you to move, in the louder power of moving anyway, even when the world tries to block your path. Olivia found herself becoming a symbol, but she refused to let them flatten her into one. She wasn't a martyr. She wasn't a saint. She was a woman who got tired, who got angry, who cried sometimes late at night when the weight of it all became too much. But she didn't let the exhaustion write her story. She wrote it herself. One morning, 2 weeks after the mural appeared, Olivia was invited to speak at the local high school. At first, she hesitated. What did she have to say that teenagers would want to hear? But when she stood in front of that crowded gymnasium, hundreds of young faces staring up at her, some skeptical, some curious, some aching for permission to breathe, she realized it wasn't about perfect speeches or slogans. It was about showing up, standing there in her hoodie, in her truth, letting them see her scars, her survival, her strength. She stepped up to the microphone, cleared her throat, and spoke. "I'm not here to tell you how to live your life," she began, voice steady but low, forcing the room to lean in to listen. "I'm not here to pretend I have all the answers. I'm just here to tell you that you are not a mistake. Your voice, your presence, your dreams, they matter. Even when the world tries to convince you otherwise, especially when the world tries to convince you otherwise." A hush fell over the room, thick and electric. She talked about what it meant to carry invisible weight, about the exhaustion of performing respectability to make others feel safe, about the cost of shrinking yourself day after day after day, and about the quiet, defiant joy of refusing to apologize for simply being. When she finished, there was no wild applause, no roaring ovation, just silence, full, heavy, sacred, and then a single pair of hands clapping, then another, and another, until the whole room rose, the sound swelling not out of obligation, but out of recognition, because they saw her now, not as a symbol, as themselves. Afterward, students lined up to speak with her, awkward, stumbling thank yous spilling out between nervous laughter and wide, teary eyes. One girl, no older than 15, whispered, "I wore my hoodie today because of you." Olivia smiled gently, resting a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You wore it for you," she said. "I just reminded you that you could, And that was the lesson. Not that you had to fight every battle, not that you had to win every war, but that you had the right to exist fully, loudly, silently, however you chose, that your dignity was not a negotiation, that your worth was not conditional. Southridge hadn't given Olivia anything. It had tried to take everything, but in trying and failing, it had handed her a gift it never intended: proof. Proof that she was stronger than their silence, stronger than their stares, stronger than their carefully constructed myths about who belonged and who didn't. And now, that proof lived not just in Olivia, it lived in every kid who pulled their hoodie up with pride, every neighbor who stopped pretending injustice was somebody else's problem, every quiet voice beginning to find its roar, not because Olivia told them to, but because she showed them they could. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Southridge didn't transform overnight. It didn't suddenly become a beacon of progress or a shining example of justice reborn. There were still cold glances at the grocery store, still whispers at the PTA meetings, still the careful distance kept by neighbors who would rather forget than change. But there were also cracks in the silence now, hairline fractures where light slipped through. And Olivia had learned how to find the light, no matter how small. One Saturday morning, She was walking through the town square, hoodie up, coffee in hand when she heard it, soft at first, almost hesitant, the voice of a young barista from the cafe that had once humiliated her, calling out, "Morning." Olivia, not problem, not lawsuit, just her name, spoken without venom, spoken without shame. It was a small thing, insignificant on the surface, but Olivia felt the weight of it settle warm against her chest. A tiny acknowledgement, a sliver of repair, and she understood that real change wasn't loud. It was quiet, cumulative, built one choice at a time. Across the square, the mural still stood bright and defiant, still unvandalized, still untouched. It had survived the backlash, the meetings, the angry emails demanding its removal, because too many people had decided it mattered. Because too many people had decided that silence was no longer an option. Olivia paused for a moment, sipping her coffee, watching a group of children chase each other in the grass nearby. One of them, a little black boy in a hoodie 3 sizes too big, darted past her, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. No fear, no hesitation, just pure, unfiltered joy. And she smiled, because that freedom was worth everything. Later that week, Olivia was invited to speak at a citywide panel on racial justice and community reform. The invitation came with all the usual bureaucratic politeness, official letterhead, carefully chosen words about progress and healing. She thought about declining, about staying home, tending her garden, protecting her peace. But then she remembered that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was stitched into the fabric of the city, now messy, painful, necessary. So she accepted. The panel was held at the Grand Municipal Auditorium downtown, a sleek, glass-walled building where decisions were made and lives were shaped without most people ever noticing. As Olivia walked through the lobby, heads turned, some with curiosity, some with admiration, and yes, some still with fear, but none of it slowed her stride. She was wearing the same hoodie, the same sneakers, the same quiet defiance stitched into every step. They had judged her for it once. Now they couldn't look away. The auditorium buzzed with activity. Officials, activists, journalists, community members clutching pamphlets and bottled water, nervously adjusting their seats. Olivia sat on the stage beside other speakers, lawyers, professors, activists who had built entire careers around words she had lived in her skin every single day. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't stand behind the podium. She didn't read a speech. She stepped forward, closer to the edge of the stage, closer to the people, and she spoke from her heart. "Change doesn't come because you pass a resolution," she said, her voice low but clear. "It doesn't come because you hold a form. It comes when you decide every day, in every small, uncomfortable moment, to choose courage over comfort, to choose justice over reputation, to choose truth over fear." She talked about the power of presence, about the cost of existing fully in spaces that were never built to hold you, about the freedom of refusing to shrink. She didn't sugarcoat the pain. She didn't pretend survival didn't have scars, but she made it clear the scars were proof that she had lived, proof that she had fought, proof that she would not be erased. The room hung on her every word, not because she was shouting, because she didn't have to. Her existence standing there, proud and unbroken, was louder than any megaphone. When she finished, there was another silence, not empty this time, full, reverent, a silence that said, "We hear you, we see you, and maybe, finally we're ready to change." After the panel, people lined up to shake her hand, some young, some old, some who looked like her, some who didn't. A woman in a crisp suit, tears shining in her eyes, whispered, "Thank you." For making space where there wasn't any before. Olivia smiled gently. "I didn't make it," she said. "I just refused to leave." And that was the truth. She hadn't kicked down the doors of Southridge. She had simply refused to disappear, refused to apologize, refused to let them decide the story for her, and in doing so, she had carved out something bigger than victory. She had carved out belonging, real belonging. The kind you claim for yourself, not the kind they give you with conditions attached. As she left the auditorium that evening, hoodie up against the cooling air, Olivia felt the weight of the day settle into her bones. It was a good weight, the weight of earned ground, the weight of lessons learned not from textbooks, but from blood and breath and unbreakable will. And as the city lights blinked on one by one around her, Olivia Harris kept walking, steady, certain, writing a lesson into the streets they could never again pretend not to see. The nights in Southridge felt different now. Not quieter the hum of distant traffic. The chirp of crickets still filled the air, but underneath it all was a new frequency, a new awareness. It wasn't that the town had suddenly grown a conscience. It was that they could no longer claim ignorance. They had seen, and once you see, you are responsible for what you choose next. Olivia understood that. She didn't expect miracles, didn't expect the hearts that had frozen over decades to thaw in a season, but every ripple mattered, every small crack in the surface, every conversation started in whispered tones around dinner tables, every young person pulling up their hoodie with pride instead of fear, every neighbor who paused, uncomfortable but unwilling to look away this time. That was the real lesson. Not that change comes fast, not that victory is clean, but that presence, stubborn, relentless, unapologetic presence could shift the ground itself if you refused to move. One evening, just after sunset, Olivia sat on the steps of the small neighborhood park, the same park where months ago, teenagers had taunted her. She sat with a notebook open in her lap, a pen tapping lightly against the page. She wasn't writing speeches, wasn't drafting lawsuits. She was writing pieces of herself, fragments of memories, flashes of laughter, moments of rage so pure she had no choice but to carve them into words. She wasn't writing to explain herself to Southridge. She was writing to remind herself that she was bigger than Southridge ever allowed her to be. Around her, the park buzzed with life, families picnicking, children chasing fireflies, teenagers lounging under trees, their laughter less cruel now, more human, and no one bothered her. No one whispered behind cupped hands. No one dared. Not because Olivia had become untouchable, but because she had made it clear she wouldn't be erased. Her existence had become part of the landscape they could no longer deny. She closed her notebook with a soft snap and leaned back, letting the cool evening breeze brush against her face. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't dared believe in for months. Peace. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't permanent, but it was hers. And she had earned every quiet, aching second of it. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a small group approaching. Two teenagers, one black, one white, walking side by side. Not tense, not posturing, just talking. And behind them, an older man, someone Olivia recognized from the town council meetings, carrying a stack of flyers for an upcoming community forum. A real one this time, one planned not to save face, but to listen, to rebuild, to begin again. They didn't approach Olivia, didn't invade her space, but as they passed, the councilman caught her eye and gave a small, respectful nod, a thank you, unspoken, but understood. Olivia returned the nod, her chest tightening, not with anger, not with resentment, but with something deeper, a solemn kind of pride, because healing wasn't about making them comfortable. It was about making sure the truth was no longer optional. It was about making the space real, even if it remained messy, awkward, incomplete. Later that night, Olivia returned home and sat on her porch, hoodie wrapped loosely around her shoulders, the sky stretched wide and black above her, scattered with stars. She thought about how far she had come, from the morning they cuffed her in the street, to the moment she questioned if she could endure it all, to the days she stood silent, letting the storm rage around her. Every step had cost something. Every breath had demanded courage she didn't know she possessed until the moment she needed it most. And now she sat here, breathing free, not because Southridge had given her permission, but because she had stopped waiting for it. Freedom, she realized, isn't something they can grant you. It's something you claim, something you carry inside you, even when they tell you to lower your eyes, even when they slap cuffs around your wrists, even when they write your name in venom on coffee cups and meeting agendas. Freedom lives in the refusal to be small, in the insistence that you have the right to take up space, to be seen, to be heard. And that night, under the endless stretch of the stars, Olivia Harris smiled, because Southridge hadn't taught her that lesson. Life had, pain had, resistance had, and now she carried it in her blood. She would not forget it. She would not lose it. She would pass it on in every step she took, in every breath she drew, in every story she dared to tell. Because the real lesson wasn't survival, it was ownership. Owning your story, owning your power, owning your right to exist without apology. And as the cool night wrapped around her like an old, familiar blanket, Olivia closed her eyes and whispered a vow into the dark. I am here. I am whole. I am unstoppable. Let them hear it. Let them fear it. Let them learn it. Because this story, her story, was just getting started. The morning came cool and sharp, sunlight slicing across Southridge in thin, golden blades. Olivia Harris laced her sneakers slowly, deliberately, her hoodie the same charcoal one worn through storms, and silence hung ready by the door. It had become a part of her, woven not just from cotton and thread, but from resistance, memory, and quiet triumph. She slid it on, tugging the hood up over her hair. The fabric rested comfortably against her shoulders. Not heavy, not burdensome. It was her second skin, her quiet armor, stepping outside. The familiar street stretched before her, the sidewalks she had once jogged cautiously, the trimmed lawns where judgment once clung like frost on windows, the corners where whispers used to gather like dark clouds. She walked now, not running, not rushing, but claiming space with every step. Southridge had not changed completely. It was still stitched with discomfort, still heavy with the weight of history it didn't want to carry, but there was a new undercurrent now, a recognition, a reckoning, and Olivia moved through it like a steady drumbeat, like a river cutting stone. At the park, a few kids played on the swings. One of them, a black girl no older than 7, wore a bright purple hoodie, her braids bouncing as she swung higher and higher into the sky. Their eyes met for a moment. The girl grinned wide, fearless. Olivia smiled back, the simple, easy kind of smile she had once forgotten how to give. Across the street, the mural still stood tall. Still I rise, bold letters gleaming against the bricks. It hadn't been defaced, hadn't been painted over. It remained, just like her. She turned down Main Street, past the cafe where it had all begun, the paper cup labeled with cruelty, the invisible walls erected with fake smiles and nervous glances. Inside, Jason, the young barista, glanced up from behind the counter. This time, there was no avoidance. He gave a nod, awkward, but genuine, a small offering. Olivia nodded back, accepting it not as an apology, but as acknowledgement. Growth didn't always come packaged in grand gestures. Sometimes it came in the simple, trembling willingness to see someone you once tried not to. She moved past storefronts and sidewalks buzzing with life. Some faces still turned away, but some didn't. Some smiled, brief and hesitant, as if testing the strength of something new inside themselves. Forgiveness wasn't Olivia's mission. It never had been. Change was. And change, real change, never moved in straight lines. It curved, it faltered, it stumbled and got back up again. She walked the full length of town, hoodie snug around her ears, every step pressing a new rhythm into the ground. I am here. I am not yours to erase. When she reached the community center, preparations were underway for another forum, this one organized by new voices, younger faces. On the front steps, a group of teenagers unfurled a banner, "Our Stories Matter." They didn't see Olivia at first. They were too busy laughing, arguing over where to hang the banner so it caught the best light, so it would be seen. She stood for a moment, watching them, the energy, the hope, the stubborn insistence on claiming space she recognized so well. Eventually, one of the girls, a tall, lanky kid with glasses, spotted her. Her face lit up. She elbowed her friend, who elbowed another, until the whole group had turned toward Olivia. For a second, an awkward hush, and then the girl in glasses stepped forward. "You, uh, you're the reason we're doing this," she said, voice cracking with nerves. Olivia shook her head gently. "No," she corrected. "You're doing this because you chose to." She didn't want to be their monument, didn't want to be frozen in their minds as some distant symbol. She wanted to remind them they already had everything they needed: courage, voice, presence. The girl flushed but smiled. Holding the banner a little higher, Olivia gave a small salute with two fingers, a silent message. "Keep going." And she walked on, past the center, past the edges of the town square, past the invisible lines they once tried to draw around her. The breeze tugged at her hoodie, but she pulled it closer, letting it shield her, comfort her, declare her. Each step she took was a story being written into the bones of the town, a story they could not unwrite, a story they could not control, a story that began long before Olivia Harris pulled up her first hoodie and would continue long after this day, because the hoodie was not the problem. The hoodie was the proof. Proof that resilience could be stitched into cloth, that dignity could be worn across your shoulders, that strength could be silent but undeniable. Olivia didn't look back. She didn't need to. Southridge's past was behind her. Her future was whatever road she chose to walk. And today, tomorrow, every day after, she would walk it with her head high, her spirit unbroken, her story unfolding, breath by breath, mile by mile. The hoodie walks on, and so does she. The road stretched ahead, framed by tall oaks swaying gently in the late morning breeze. Olivia Harris walked it without hesitation, each step a quiet declaration, each breath a reclamation, not because she was trying to prove anything anymore, but because simply existing, fully, unapologetically, was enough. It was everything. As she passed through the older part of town, she noticed small changes tucked between the familiar cracks. A bookstore window displayed a collection of titles by Black authors, framed with a handwritten sign, "Stories Worth Hearing." A church bulletin board announced an upcoming speaker series, "Facing Our Blind Spots." Even the town newspaper, the one that once buried her arrest story under flour, show results now featured an editorial titled, "Listening Isn't Enough." Olivia didn't slow down to read every word. She didn't need to, because real change wasn't measured by headlines. It was measured in the shifting of the air, the way old structures trembled, not from violence, but from relentless, undeniable truth. At the edge of town, where Southridge faded into long fields and open sky, Olivia paused. The streets were quieter here. No reporters, no protests, no stage, just the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat, the soft scuff of her sneakers on concrete, the gentle weight of her hoodie, warm against her skin. She pulled the hood down for a moment, letting the sun kiss her scalp, closing her eyes, breathing, not bracing, not waiting for the next blow, just breathing. Freedom, she realized, was quieter than she had expected. It wasn't the roar of a crowd or the clash of confrontation. It was this space, stillness. A self no longer folded small enough to fit into someone else's idea of acceptable. When she opened her eyes again, the world seemed sharper, the trees greener, the sky wider, the horizon infinite. She thought back to the girl she had been months ago, lacing her sneakers before dawn, hoodie pulled tight, praying to be invisible, to avoid notice, to survive another day in a town that looked at her and saw only a problem. And she thought about the woman standing here now, no longer shrinking, no longer apologizing, no longer asking for permission. The distance between them wasn't measured in miles, it was measured in choice. In every morning, Olivia chose to pull that hoodie up again, to step out her front door again, to insist in 1,000 small ways that she belonged, that she always had. She started walking again, this time with a lighter step, her pace unhurried. The town would go on. There would be more battles, more pushback, more moments when the old ways tried to claw their way back into dominance. But Olivia understood now. The fight wasn't about winning every battle. It was about refusing to surrender the space you had carved out. It was about staying visible, staying loud even in your silence, staying present in a world that would rather you vanish. As she crossed the bridge leading back into town, a truck slowed beside her. For a split second, her body tensed, muscle memory honed by too many encounters that started just like this. But when she glanced over, she saw a young woman college-aged, white behind the wheel, offering a shy wave. Not pity, not fear, respect. Olivia lifted her chin in acknowledgement, then kept walking. Let them see. Let them learn. She wasn't here to make them comfortable. She was here to live. And living, in its truest, rawest form, would always be the loudest declaration. At the community center, preparations were still underway. The forum banners snapped lightly in the wind. Kids chalked slogans onto the sidewalk, laughing when their letters wobbled and smeared. Olivia lingered at the edge for a moment, watching, not ready to join, not needing to lead, just content to know that the work was bigger than her now, bigger than any one person. It would be messy, it would be slow, but it had begun. She turned down a side street lined with aging maples, their branches arching overhead like cathedral ceilings. An older man, stooped but steady, tended a small garden in his front yard. He straightened when he saw her, wiping dirt from his hands. "Morning, Miss Harris," he said, voice rough but warm. She smiled, genuine and wide. "Morning." It was the first time he had ever addressed her by name. A small thing, but small things stacked together built monuments that outlasted fear. As she continued down the street, the town moving around her, Olivia felt it, that steady hum beneath her skin. Not anger, not grief, something fiercer, something freer. Hope, not the fragile kind that asks politely, the kind that plants its feet, the kind that raises its hood, the kind that walks through the world and dares it to change. At the far end of the street, a little boy in a navy hoodie was riding his bike in wobbly, looping circles. As Olivia passed, he wobbled up beside her, grinning gap-toothed. "Nice hoodie," he shouted joyfully. She laughed, the sound spilling out unguarded, rich and full. "Thanks," she called back. "You too." And as he sped ahead, his hoodie flapping behind him like a flag, Olivia Harris walked on, toward the horizon, toward the future, toward a world she was helping to build, one unbreakable step at a time. The hoodie walks on, and so does the story. The late afternoon sun slanted across Southridge, throwing long shadows across the streets Olivia once feared to walk alone. She didn't fear them anymore. She didn't fear the glances, the whispers, the sideways smiles wrapped in polite cruelty. She didn't fear the silence that used to press down on her like a second skin, because she had outlasted it. She had stood when they tried to erase her. And now, every breath she drew was an act of defiance and a promise to herself. As she turned the last corner toward her house, Olivia slowed, savoring the simple rhythm of her feet against the cracked concrete. She didn't rush anymore, didn't shrink herself to fit neatly between the lines they tried to draw around her. The streets belonged to her as much as to anyone else. And today, she moved like she believed it. In her front yard, the roses she had planted long ago, back when hope felt fragile, bloomed defiantly, bright, sharp-edged, untamed. She smiled as she climbed the porch steps, the hoodie still wrapped snug around her shoulders. Inside, her house was quiet, not with fear, but with peace. The kind of peace earned, not given. The kind of peace you fight for. Every step, every breath, every word unsaid, and every word shouted when necessary. On the kitchen table lay a stack of letters, some from old friends who had drifted away, now writing awkward apologies, some from strangers, thanking her for standing firm, some from young people, pouring out their own stories of being seen, of finding courage. Olivia thumbed through them, heart steady. She wasn't naive. She knew public attention was fickle. She knew that for many, she was just the story of the moment, a headline, a hashtag, an uncomfortable truth to be processed and then forgotten. But for others, for the ones who mattered, she was a reminder that dignity isn't conditional, a reminder that silence doesn't protect you, it only prolongs your invisibility, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest revolution is simply refusing to disappear. She tucked the letters into a drawer, a quiet archive of a battle still being fought. Tomorrow, she knew, there would be more work, meetings, calls, conversations heavy with the slow weight of change. But tonight was hers. She stepped back onto the porch as the first stars blinked awake in the deepening sky. Southridge looked almost beautiful at this hour. Almost. The sharp edges blurred by dusk, the cracks in its polished facade hidden by forgiving shadows. But Olivia didn't need the town to be perfect anymore. She only needed it to be honest. And if it wasn't yet, well, she would keep walking until it was. Down the street, a few porch lights flickered on. A neighbor waved. Another called a soft, tentative hello. Bridges, shaky and splintered, but bridges nonetheless. She tucked her hands into the front pocket of her hoodie and smiled, not because she needed their welcome, but because she had made a home inside herself that no amount of cruelty could touch. And that was something no town, no system, no history could ever take from her. Freedom wasn't a place. It was a posture. It was a choice, made again and again, especially when the world insisted you didn't deserve it, especially when the world looked at your skin, your clothes, your silence, and decided you were a threat. The real victory wasn't forcing Southridge to change overnight. It was refusing to let Southridge change her. She was still Olivia Harris, still the black woman in the hoodie, still standing, still walking, still writing her own story. And as she looked out over the quiet streets, she realized something else. This wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been told they were too much, too loud, too black, too different. It belonged to every kid pulling on their hoodie and stepping out into a world that wasn't always kind, but was still worth walking through. It belonged to the future she had fought to make a little wider, a little kinder, a little braver. The hoodie walks on, and so do the dreams stitched into its seams, dreams of dignity, dreams of space, dreams of being seen not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be respected. As Olivia stood there, bathed in the soft, rising dark, she whispered a promise not to Southridge, not even to the world, to herself. I will keep walking, no matter how long the road, no matter how many times they try to block it. I will keep walking because this hoodie carries more than fabric and thread. It carries survival. It carries strength. It carries stories, thousands of stories that refuse to be silenced. And so, with the night unfolding before her like a map with no end, Olivia Harris stepped off her porch, hoodie up, head high, heart wide open, and the hoodie walked on, into tomorrow, into forever, in a world that often mistakes silence for weakness and difference for danger. Olivia Harris chose a different path. She chose to walk head high, hoodie up through every stare, every whisper, every attempt to erase her. She chose to exist, boldly and without apology, and in doing so, she didn't just survive Southridge, she transformed it. Her story reminds us that true strength isn't loud. It's steady, it's resilient, it's stitched into every step we take when the world tells us to stand still. It's stitched into every hoodie worn by those who refuse to be invisible. This is more than a story. It's a legacy, and it's still being written in every small act of courage, every truth spoken aloud, every person who chooses to walk on despite the odds. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If Olivia's story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, please subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Silent Power Stories is a home for voices like Olivia's, stories about dignity, stories about endurance, stories about the quiet, unbreakable power we all carry inside us. And remember, every hoodie carries a story, every step leaves a mark. Keep walking. We'll walk with you.